Good morning. Good morning. Hey, everybody. My name is Tracy Brown, and I'm the president of Intentional Inclusion Incorporated, the moderator and host of the What Is Mine to Do Facebook group, and the founder of Stained Glass Spirit. And all three of those are related to some aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, acceptance, all of the things that we are doing in order to create a world where people are respectful of one another, where we recognize and value all the ways that we are different from one another and use those differences in a positive way to achieve common goals, shared vision, and have fun while doing it. Now, I know that very last part, have fun while doing it, may not resonate with some of you, but if you're like me, that is a part of your goal. That you, like me, believe that diversity is not a mistake. It is no accident that there are so many different kinds of people in the world. And it's kind of fun for me to explore that, even when I have to have some hard conversations. So, welcome to the Achieving Inclusion Summit. The theme this year is Be Bold. Like, get out there, do something different, take some risks, be bold in your commitment to inclusion. And since that could cover so much information and go in so many different directions, we chose three tracks to focus on during these 3 days. One track is avoiding fatigue or recovering from diversity fatigue. And be talking about that during the retreat from both the perspective of the individual person who is leading or are being very active in DEI initiatives, avoiding fatigue, but also from an organizational point of view, because I have been with a lot of organizations where they've been doing what they have labeled diversity work for a long time, and people are kind of burnt out about the topic or the theme itself. So we'll address both of those during the 3 days. So avoiding fatigue is one track. The second track is confronting racism. And it's so interesting because we've been doing DEI work in our organizations for a long, long time and in our communities for an even longer time. And racism is that topic that for many people is very difficult. And many organizations avoided talking about or healing the consciousness of racism for a long time. But in the last 2 to 3 years, it has become something that has a spotlight on it. And so, not just talking about what racism is, but really confronting racism and what are things you can do and say, and how do you have to position yourself? Like, what's your mindset about confronting racism? And the third track is measuring progress. Now, in my work with organizations and leaders over the last couple of decades, one of the most asked questions is, well, how do I measure our success? Is usually what people say. How will we measure our success? Like, we've got to be able to check off some numbers and some data, and then, we're done because we will have been successful. But the reality is, we want to think about measuring the progress we make, because just like some other topics, safety for one, we never think, oh, we're going to reach a destination and then we never have to talk about safety again. No. So we don't think about that when we say quality. We want to create a quality standard. We want to maintain or exceed that quality standard. And when we achieve that, that allows us to see now what can we do? What do we have to do in order to excel with quality? And diversity or inclusion actually is the same way, that to create an inclusive environment and for people to feel included is a part of your ongoing culture, and you will always have something to either achieve, create, or maintain. So you will hear us talking about what are some ways to measure progress, especially how do you think about that up front? Not so much after, although we will have some conversation about that, but how do you build in some things that you can measure that are observable up front? So those are the three tracks: avoiding fatigue, confronting racism, and measuring progress. And so you can expect during the next 3 days that my guests and I are totally committed to giving you some practical tips, challenging you a little bit on your thinking and on your doing. And I am really excited about the featured guests that I will be having conversations with. We'll be live streaming the entire summit. So there will be sessions at 10 a.m., 12 noon, 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, April 26th through April 28th. So you can plan your day if you are able to put some breaks in, and at 10, 12, noon, 10, 12. Noon is 12, in case you got confused like my brain. 10, 12, 2, and 4 p.m. Central Time. So make the time zone adjustment. No session is longer than 45 minutes. So you will have time to check your email or touch in with someone else or do a little work or have other meetings between the sessions. And in fact, because we are live streaming it, at the end of each session, it will still be viewable, whether you are watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. So please, over the next 3 days, make some time to touch base. And if you have not registered, but you want to know which speakers are speaking and at what time, then I encourage you to go to achieving-inclusion.com and then register so that you can see the schedule in advance, because there may be a conversation that is directly related to what you are working on right now in your DEIB initiatives. So I am aware that there may be some of you who are tapping into the summit and you've not worked with Tracy Brown or Intentional Inclusion Incorporated before. I am going to share some specific information in just a few minutes about the 8 essential elements of an effective inclusion strategy. But before I do that, in this welcome segment, this will probably be the only time during these 3 days where I talk a little bit more about who I am and what the company does and what we're known for, because many of you have been invited by some of my featured guests, or some of you just got captured because it came up live on your stream and you're like, who is this woman? So, Intentional Inclusion Incorporated, we're based in Dallas, Texas, and we work with leaders and organizations all over the US. Number one, on inclusion strategy, how to take your commitment or your desire for inclusion to be the descriptor that is used for your organization, and how to take that commitment or desire and really integrate it with your mission, your vision, your values, your business priorities, what's going on in your organization right now, as well as how you want to set up your organization for the future. We've worked with Fortune 100 companies, and we've worked with local community nonprofit organizations. We've worked with international associations providing education at chapter meetings as well as international conferences. And we have worked with community organizations that are just based in a neighborhood or in a city working on community issues. So, our sweet spot, many people have told me, I have learned this is our sweet spot, is that on the consulting part of our business, that being able to take in a lot of information and synthesize it into a customized plan. Like, what do you need to do that will get you where you want to go? And I've heard that over and over again, that they've talked with other consultants who just said, well, here are the top 10 best practices, and let me show you all the articles that have been written, and you need to do these 10 things, right? Or you need to do 7 of these 10 things. And it not really allowing for the industry or the culture in that organization. So our consulting clients tell us that that's one of the sweet spots. And then about 40% of our business is consulting, and about 40% is training. And the clients who hire us to facilitate or to develop training modules or to lead multi-day retreats for their diversity advisory group or for their executive leaders. The feedback is that I'll just tell you what a client said, and I used it as a tagline for about 4 years, a few years back. She was introducing us to some internal folks that she had brought us in to do some training with. And in her introduction, she said, I went through a 4 module session last year hosted by our association. And I knew I had to bring Tracy in to do training in my company, in this company, because I really was afraid to talk about diversity, and I really didn't understand how to talk about inclusion. And talking about both diversity and inclusion is really easy with a little help from Tracy Brown and intentional inclusion. And I didn't know she was going to say that. And then I thought, yeah, in training, what I'm trying to do or in development, I want people to be able to relate the topic to what's important to them and to have conversations that are meaningful to them. And that means a lot of what we do is change the conversation from talking about politics or individual people's personalities or the problems that are caused by diversity, and instead really shape the conversation around the business relationships that are required to be successful, the business results that are required to stay in business or to operate long term as an association, and the personal responsibility that we all have to contribute to creating a culture where inclusion is the norm. So those are things that clients say about intentional inclusion. And I'll just add a little bit about myself. Just 2 days ago, in fact, someone asked me who's interested in switching their career or transforming their career to do more work in DEI. And they asked me, well, Tracy, like, how'd you get started? And I laugh when people ask me that, because sometimes what comes to mind is I started doing inclusion work when I was 2 years old, because my family, which was and is a Black family, the family I was born into, moved into what until that time had been a previously all white neighborhood. And I think there are things that I learned at 2 and 3 and 4 that I didn't know I was learning about building cross-cultural bridges, about navigating situations where people were judging me based on my outside, and I needed to learn how to get them to connect with my inside, and I needed to be able to connect with people individually as well as with group dynamics. And sometimes when people say, well, how did you train for this, or how did you prepare? I don't think of being 2 years old, but I think of being 4 years old and basically being told that my friend across the street couldn't have me in her house because people like me are not allowed in the house. But all of my experiences weren't based on race. I also, as I grew up, had experiences where I was the youngest. And there was a 2 to 4 year age difference with the group I needed to interact with. Or when I worked full time in healthcare, I was the person who was not clinically trained in a clinical specialty, right? I was a leader and I was an executive, but I was working with people who had maybe started their healthcare career as a nurse or as a lab tech or as a medical records clerk or as a phlebotomist or right in healthcare. And so all through my life, I have really had what I consider the gift of being different in some way and recognizing how to build effective relationships and get results using, not in spite of the difference, but using the difference and seeing the uniqueness in others and encouraging them to use their differences as well. So if this is your first introduction to intentional inclusion and or Tracy Brown, I hope that gives you a little bit of information that's helpful for you. And this is one of the reasons why we host every quarter free events under the banner of Achieving Inclusion. In the second quarter, which is right now, we do a multi-day event. But in the other quarters, we do a free 90-minute webinar on a topic that our clients have been asking for more information about. And if you want to see what some of those topics have been, if you go to achievinginclusion.com and you scroll down, we have links to the replay of all of the webinars and last year's summit, where you can look for a topic or a title that relates to you and check it out at no cost. So that is all of the general information that I'm going to share with you. I promised that you would receive during this welcome session some information as well, because content. Those of you who know me know that, yeah, I am not going to just talk about Tracy Brown for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, because I'm just not that interesting. I'm really not. And so, and I know it. I guess no one is that interesting, but some speakers, some authors, some consultants, they don't know that they're really not that interesting. And you did not sign up for the summit just to hear about me. So I've given you a little bit about the summit itself, and I've given you some about Tracy Brown and intentional inclusion. But now let me give you some content about 8 essential elements that you need to consider as you are creating or updating your strategy. 8 essential elements of an inclusion strategy really developed from a client request where I was going in and working with their inclusion advisory council. And they were really struggling with bringing together a lot of activities they had been doing and creating a full blown strategic direction for their work. And so part of my task became just explaining to them and working with them around what is it that would make your strategy really effective. And as we were having these conversations, this kind of model emerged that I used with them, but I also used with, I have used with other clients over the last, oh, I don't know, 12 years or so. So let's see. Yeah, let's go. So the first thing that you want to really, really keep in mind is that you've got to be clear about your overall expectations and your desired outcomes. One of the mistakes that I have observed a lot of organizations make is that they're like, well, we'll put it together. And as we put it together, the outcomes will become clear. No, 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 no. In this summit, one of the reasons one of the tracks is measuring progress is because a lot of times the most difficult challenge for measuring progress is the fact that we didn't identify the desired outcomes up front. We said, oh, the desired outcome basically is that we have an inclusion strategy. Okay, so you have a document and maybe you've got a PowerPoint and you have a strategy. But if your strategy doesn't have some direction or something that you are moving toward, then you don't know if you're making progress or not. You know, you have a strategy, so you're 100% successful if that's your goal, just to have a strategy. Or you are other organizations I've been lucky to work with have been like, oh, well, we know what our desired outcome is. Our desired outcome is that we have an inclusive culture. Inclusion is built into our culture. Okay, we could start there, but how will you know? How will you know your culture is inclusive? So at the very beginning, defining some expectations and desired outcomes, not to the granular level, of, X number of people in these specific roles. No, that's actually more like what you would do in an affirmative action plan, not in your inclusion strategy. But to have some things that people can clearly see, oh, we're going to develop behaviors that result in, X, Y, and Z. So, essential element number one of an effective inclusion strategy is having clear expectations and desired outcomes, being able to answer the question, what will be changed or what will be improved as a result of this strategy. So about 30% of the work that we do is with hospitals and healthcare or health services related organizations. And so if I were working with a hospital and they said, for our strategy, we want to achieve our mission, which is to improve the health of the community, that's great as a place to start the conversation. But I would be asking, all right, so for the inclusion strategy, what are 3 things that we could be working on that would contribute to that mission, to that end goal? And so there might be one piece in the strategy that is focused on care, quality of care, or ending or reducing disparities in care. That's with the patients, right? Or that would be that aspect. And maybe one aspect or one track in that strategy, we would say that we have some desired outcomes about the mix of employees that we have. And we might have a statement about that. And maybe there's a third outcome, desired outcome. We want to have an inclusion strategy because we want to be involved in the community that we serve. And there may be a whole community outreach element in their strategy. It could be 3 different things. It could be, totally different from that. I'm just trying to give you a way to think about it. So in your organization, what expectations and desired outcomes are you including in your strategy? And if you're, brave and bold, since this is the Be Bold Summit, if you want to drop in the chat 1 or 2 of the expectations or desired outcomes that your organization has in your strategy, that would be great. Because during this summit, we are going to be learning from each other, not just Tracy. So of the 8 elements, that's number 1. And I spend a little bit more time there because, right, you start with the end in mind. And if you start there, it makes some of the other decisions you have to make as you build your strategy a little easier. So let's look at number 2. Number 2 is you want executive commitment. How will your senior leaders, your executive leaders, be involved in leading the way? Leading the way, not just saying, oh, yeah, this is important. Yeah, it's important. Let's do something around inclusion. So spending some time clarifying what is the executive commitment. And in this case, I am not talking just about the CEO, but the layer in your organization of leaders who are considered executives, who are responsible for large parts of your organization. What is expected of them? What are they willing to commit to? And in your strategy, you will want a section that really designates the activities that they would be doing and the kind of leadership that will be expected from your executive leaders. Number 3, employee leadership. Now, I've been really surprised at how rare it is for folks to have in their strategy some very specific elements related to employee leadership of the overall strategy. The question to ask yourself is, how will employee led initiatives be featured and how will they be valued? How will employee led initiatives be featured and how will they be valued? Many larger organizations have employee resource groups or business resource groups. And in fact, one day during the summit, I'm going to do a Tracy's Tips segment specifically about reinventing your employee groups. But for this conversation, employee leadership, it's critical. But what's important is to recognize how will that be valued so it's not just busy work. I have some really sad stories about organizations that I've been called in to just do an assessment of their inclusion strategy, and they had employee led activities, they had employee resource groups, they had employees who were engaged in pockets of the organization, but they had no visibility. So the employees who were doing, 5 things over here in this facility had no communication with the employees who were doing 3 different things in this facility. And organizationally wide, there was no communication about all the things that the employees were doing. And there were a lot of employees who were passionate about diversity and inclusion, but they were burnt out and they felt like all of their efforts were not valued. And some of them were getting pushback from the managers they reported to, who were like, if you have time to do this, I just need to give you more work because, this stuff isn't important. And in every case where those kinds of things were going on, in the strategy for the organization, there had not been conscious attention paid to what the value added factors were for employee leadership. Or there were a couple where that was in the strategy, but it wasn't talked about by executives. It wasn't publicized by the organization. The employees were having to figure out ways to publicize their own events on their own. And if they were making flyers or printing things, they were spending their own money to do that. And so you want to build that into your strategy. That is essential element number 3. Essential element number 4 is to do an environmental assessment. And when you are building or transforming your strategy, you've got to ask yourself, do we have the people and the systems in place that will support this change? So I'm not talking about the environmental assessment or audit of attitudes. I'm talking about really assessing, do we have the right people doing the right thing? Do we have systems in place to support what we have said our primary goals are? Do we have the environment that will support us moving in the direction that we want to move? That's 4 of the 8 essential elements that you must consider. Number 5 is, as you are creating your strategy, what approach are you taking with education and what approach are you taking with outreach? What educational needs must we address to achieve this goal? What education do people need? Skills in how to resolve cross-cultural conflict? Do people need general awareness about what the definition is of diversity, and that diversity is not just racism or dealing with race and gender? What education is required? And almost always, there is a need for different education in different parts of your organization. Sometimes that is by level of responsibility, but other times it is based on functional silos, because people have different needs, because they are actually contributing different skills to the success of the business. So education and outreach, really, really important. Outreach in this case is really referring to the education that you might have to provide to your vendors, the education you might need to provide out into the community about who you are as an organization and what you are trying to do. It's education, but it's outside of your, what you consider your four walls. Okay, we've got 3 more to go. In your strategy, be sure that you address your external stakeholders. Who are your external stakeholders? Who must you include at each stage of the process? And this may or may not be. This is beyond just educating people about how to interact with you or what is important to your organization. It really is about the partnerships you have, and are they representative of the diversity within your marketplace, for example, right? Who are the external stakeholders? And who must we include and get input and feedback from in order to truly be inclusive? And that will be different based on your industry. That will be different based on the size of your organization. I recently was doing work with an engineering firm. And when you think about external stakeholders, well, one of them could be considered their current customers, as they're not employees. But there was a conversation that needed to happen. If the goal for the inclusion strategy was to use this strategy to help increase market share in 2 new markets, their external stakeholders who are not customers or clients yet, but there's a reason that that firm was not already ensconced in these 2 new markets, or 2 markets that would be new for them in terms of great expansion. And so building into the strategy a process for how are we going to get information about what people in that marketplace or in that niche in the marketplace, what do they think is important? How do they use engineering firms? How can we make sure we have the communication skills and tools that are required in order to build that bridge? Because this is important to us for the growth of our business, but it will represent a real stretch for us in being inclusive, because we are newbies in engaging with that group of people. And so you want to have in your strategy some very specific direction or guidance around who your external stakeholders are and who you will include or how you will include them at different stages. Of course, you cannot have a strategy without considering how will we evaluate our progress. So the question I love to ask, what behaviors and what results are expected How will we track and celebrate our progress? Now, those of you who know me know I will go on a rant. So I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to go on a rant today, because a lot of times when we say metrics, people think of, oh yeah, what are we going to measure? And when we don't meet that measurement, what's the penalty or what's the consequence? How are we going to enforce this? And there is a place for that, both behaviorally and quantitatively. If we don't meet our numbers, or if someone says or does something that is blatantly racist or discriminatory, yeah, there is a place for consequence or for punishment or for termination. There is a place for that. Please don't misunderstand me. But those should be the exceptions. We want to have metrics so that we can see the progress we're making and celebrate it. We want to have measurements and what we are evaluating, because we want to be able to say to people, these are the behaviors that we expect, and you are knocking it out of the ballpark. And we're so proud of you. And so when you think about your evaluative factors and the metrics you use, then I encourage you to think about, oh, well, what do we want to reward? Not just what do we want to punish? And item number 8 that needs to be in your inclusion strategy is you do want to have throughout the document or as an appendix some explanations of your definitions of different terms and why you use them the way you do, or some reference materials. These are the resources that help people translate what you are saying is really important in your strategy. It helps them translate it into their mind, into their heart, into their actions. And I have seen very few inclusion strategies that have supplemental materials that provide that information. And we have technology now, unlike 10 or 12 years ago, we have the technology now where some of that can be information provided in video. Some of it can be in game form. It can be an online course that people can link to right at the back of the strategy, link to this 15-minute online course that explains this item. Be creative about it. Just don't skip it. Don't skip giving people additional explanations and resource materials. So these are the 8 essential elements that if your inclusion strategy doesn't include them, I would very strongly encourage you the next time that you are doing an upgrade or a revision to your strategy, that you look at how you might include those things. And if you want more information about the 8 essential elements, or if you want to learn how to use them, or you want us to help you use them, then just send me an email, tracy@tracybrown.com, and we can talk about how I can help you, or how someone on my team can help you walk through the 8 essential elements of an intentional, effective inclusion strategy. So I hope this helps. You've had about 15 minutes of an intro into the summit and what you can expect over the next 3 days. I am so looking forward to sharing with you not only the information that I have for you, but the ideas and the challenges that have been faced by my featured guests. Again, if you don't already have the full schedule, go to achievinginclusion.com, and there you will find links to get more information about previous webinars, but you also will find the schedule or the way to register to have access to the schedule for all 3 days. Well, I think that's just about it. If you've gotten anything from this session that's helpful, please put it in the comments, put it in the chat. Or if you have specific questions that you want us to talk about during the remainder of the summit, you can also put that in the chat because we are monitoring that information, and you'll never know when we will just weave in the response to your question. My name is Tracy Brown. I'll see you throughout the summit.